Hello everyone, this is Taryn with Wonderfully Made Handcrafting and welcome to Theology Thursday. So today is our first ever Theology Thursday, so the first ever in this series of YouTube videos that I'll be creating. And I wanted to kind of walk through the Westminster Shorter Catechism with you guys. Now, don't be afraid. When I first heard a catechism, I thought it was just for Catholics. I didn't know that there was Protestant or Reformed catechisms. Maybe I am one of the only ones that didn't know that, but I didn't know. And so I kind of wanted to talk to you about what the Westminster Shorter Catechism is and a couple of books that are used as helpful resources when going through it, and also going through the Bible and answering some of the questions we have from the first question of the Westminster Shorter Catechism. So first off, let me tell you kind of about this catechism. So this catechism was written in the 1640s by English and Scottish theologians, mostly Presbyterians and some Puritans, but nowadays many Baptists have adopted the catechism to help write their own confessions of faith and doctrines. So this catechism was written about 120 years after Luther posted his 95 Theses. The structure follows the Heidelberg Catechism that was written in 1562. So if you've heard of the Heidelberg, this one came a little bit later, and it follows the same kind of structure. So what is the Westminster Shorter Catechism? So the Catechism is a summary of Christian doctrine and theology in 107 questions. Now, these questions are questions that are often asked in the Christian faith. It says, the Bible is God's word. The Catechism simply helps us remember and be able to answer succinctly some of the most common and important questions of the faith. So this book, the Catechism itself, is absolutely not as important as the Bible. Actually, I want to read a quote from this book that talks about that, and it's actually within the first question that we're going to talk about. It says, "But Jesus said that the Bible is sufficient by itself." Revelations 22:18-20. "The man who has the Bible says the Bible itself is thoroughly furnished unto all good works." 2 Timothy 3:15-17. And what about the creeds, confessions, and catechisms of Reformed churches? Well, we must always remember that these stand far below the Bible. They're not intended to be and must not be treated as if they are equal to the Bible in any way. We use them as convenient summaries of the teaching of the Bible. But we must never be content to just believe the catechism. We must always make sure we personally prove the teaching of the catechism by the Bible. Only then will our faith be acceptable and secure. And so the catechism is just used as a tool so that you can answer those questions easier, the questions of the faith. So we're actually going through this with our own kids. We have an 8-year-old, a 6-year-old, and 2-year-old. Obviously, the 2-year-old's not really understanding much of it, but it's just a solid discipleship tool. And sometimes the 6-year-old doesn't really understand, and sometimes we have questions as adults. So that's why it's so good to go through this as a family. And so that is what we have started doing. Now, there are 2 books that I have here that I recommend. This is the Westminster Shorter Catechism for study classes, and it is the second edition. But what it does is there's 107 questions to the Shorter Catechism, and it goes through every one like this. And it has, it's like a study. So I'll have the question, it'll have some verses that line up and back up the answer. And then it kind of goes more in depth on the question. And then what is great is it has different figures and little drawings, and that helps my kids a lot understand what we're talking about. And then at the end, it does have review questions. Now, these review questions, some of them are so easy that my kids can totally get it. And some of them are really in depth and stuff that my husband and I just go back and forth on what the correct answer is. So it kind of is a broad range of ages that are covered in this book. So each question will go through the same kind of structure. So that is this book. And then this one was suggested by Vodi Bauckham. And this one is Family Devotions based on the Shorter Catechism. And what's cool about this one is, let me get to the beginning. Okay, so they have question 1, and they write the question a little bit simpler for kids to understand. So I appreciate that. If my kids are having trouble with understanding what the question means in here, I can usually go to this one and say the question in different wording, and they'll understand it. It's very similar wording, but just a little bit easier. And then they have a little short devotional Monday through Saturday, and that will go all over this one question. So they'll have 1 week of question 1, and then another week of question 2, and answering that with different devotionals. And they're just so simple and sweet. I really like this book, especially for my younger 6-year-old and obviously 2-year-old who won't understand everything, but they can still grab onto some stuff. So these are the 2 books that go over the catechism that I have started reading. But yeah, let's kind of jump in to the catechism. So we're going to start from the beginning with the Shorter Catechism, and question 1 is the most well-known question. If you have heard of the Westminster Shorter Catechism, then you probably know the question and answer for question 1. And that question is, what is the chief end of man? And the answer is, man's chief end is to glorify God and to enjoy him forever. So it's split up into 2 parts, and we have 2 parts that are defending that answer. So let's go to the Bible and see what the defense is. We have 1 Corinthians 10:31. So this is backing up the first part, man's chief end is to glorify God, which says, so whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do all to the glory of God. And then we also have Revelation 4:11 backing up that first statement. And that says, worthy are you, our Lord and God, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and by your will they existed and were created. And then as we go on to the second part, and to enjoy him forever, we're going to flip on over to Psalms. If I can get my Post-it to cooperate with me. And we're going to go to Psalms 73, 25 and 26, which says, whom have I in heaven but you? And there is nothing on earth that I desire besides you. My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever. And so these are just a couple of the many verses in the Bible that can back up this answer to question 1. And that is what's so important. I think when kids are asked questions about their faith, when they're teens, or even as children or as adults, when we're sharing the gospel with someone and someone has a question, I find that these questions are so important to know the answer to, like to give a succinct answer, but also to be able to back up your answer, because if you can't back up your answer, then there's no reason for your answer. So that is why I've decided to go over the Shorter Catechism with you guys for Theology Thursdays. Now we're going to obviously do some theology, some doctrine in these days, and I hope you really enjoy this. And hopefully maybe you can work on memorizing these questions and answers with me. They're super easy to answer, to memorize the answers, and so I think that would be great. So I'm going to just read it one more time. What is the chief end of man? Man's chief end is to glorify God and to enjoy him forever. So let's go on to the crafty side. So as I work through this series, I'm going to be using these number 8 size distress tags. And I love them because they hold so much mixed media really well. And I don't get to use my distress sprays too often because they're a little trickier to use in Bible journaling. And so I'm really excited to create some really fun backgrounds and do a lot of layering and chunkage. Now I'm using 3 different sprays here. 2 of them are going to be just distress spray stains, and those are in the colors Speckled Egg and Frayed Burlap. And then I'm also using a distress oxide spray, and that is in the vintage photo color. So I'm laying down my just regular spray stains first and getting kind of a background going first before I add my oxide spray. Now with these sprays, I always prefer to use the non-stick matte portion of this mixed media mat. It just takes the sprays better and makes them into little dots. I just love what the non-stick mat does. This non-stick mat has been through it. I actually have a brand new one waiting for me in my desk drawer, but I just keep on using stuff until I can't use it anymore. What I do with these sprays is I spray them down on the mat first, and then I add a couple spritzes of water, kind of gets them blended a little bit and makes those dots appear. And I did spray the tag a little bit to kind of mix those colors together and give me more of a solid background before I kind of dip them into these little dots as you see me doing here. This is actually my favorite part of mixed media. I love it when you use sprays and get those little tiny dots on the cards. It's just my favorite. And so here I am adding a little bit more of that frayed burlap stain down. I want to get a couple more dark spots on this card before I start adding some layers. Now another little trick when doing mixed media sprayed backgrounds, make sure you dry between layers so the colors don't get all muddied together. Now I'm ready to start working on my layers. I found this adorable picture of a brother and sister at a local thrift store, and a follower, Bonte, sent me a bunch of old tax documents and other vintage ephemera. These were all from the 1920s. And so I'm really wanting to bring in that speckled egg color that I use in the background. So I'm looking for one of these cool blue colors. So I found this one that was from 1926, and I'm going to kind of just rip it out of this bundle of documents. And then I will start working on layering these pieces together on this tag. I know everything won't fit completely on this tag, and I know I'm also losing quite a bit of my background, but that's okay because this is all about mixed media and that layering look. I know I don't need more than half of this ephemera piece, and so I'm going to cut it in half so I can make sure to use it in another mixed media layout. I really like how this bill document was folded over, but I knew that I probably couldn't keep that way because I wanted to see number 235 on it. And so instead I decided to fold over that corner of the photo. That helps it actually fit more onto the tag anyhow. And so I'm just going to hold these in place, flip it over, and cut these edges off. Now I know it may seem a little silly, but I did take those 2 little pieces I cut off and stuck them back in my vintage ephemera box. A lot of times when you're doing layering for a mixed media tag or a Bible journaling page, you don't need big pieces. Sometimes it's those little pieces that make a cluster. And so I always try to keep those things, especially if they're vintage ephemera, just because of the nostalgia of it all. I did have this children's book page from Bobby. She sent that to me, and I really wanted to use the clock, but at the same time I felt like it was overtaking the tag, so I'm going to save it for another tag in the future. I did have one of these gold medal stamp books in my stash, and these are great if you ever find them at like your thrift store or estate sales. They're just fun little elements that you can tuck into clusters, and they just add that little piece that really brings the cluster together. What's great about these gold medal stamp books is that they're usually fairly cheap. They're not too old. So you can get them at a good price, and you get so many stamps in a booklet if they've used them. And you can use them in so many different paper crafting projects. So this is actually a new ephemera pack from Tim Holtz called Snippets Curator. I did get it at a big box craft store that I believe got an early shipment. This is supposed to be released in the middle of September, so pretty soon. But if you see it, definitely pick it up. It is so worth it. I believe there's over 220 little ephemera pieces in it, and they just make the perfect addition. It's kind of like those gold medal stamps. They just bring a cluster all together. Since we're working on the questions of the Westminster Shorter Catechism, I want to make sure I number each question. I do have the number on the back side that I've typed out on my typewriter, but I want each displayed piece on the front of the tag to have a number. So I'm not sure if I'll use these marquee letters every time, but I want to make sure to include that. So I grabbed a 1 out to add to my layering pieces, and I also grabbed the new re-released Tim Holtz Mummy Cloth. Now this comes out with his Halloween line. Like I've said before, we don't celebrate Halloween, but I know that a lot of his Halloween stuff you can use in your fall or just all year long crafting. And so I cut a little piece out because I thought it would be the perfect little layering piece and add a different texture to this tag. I also did grab a floral from Hobby Lobby. I think it's from the Paper Studio Company. And I'm going to make this almost look like a tiny little ribbon of the flower on top with the 2 trails of mummy cloth falling down behind it. And so I just stapled that mummy cloth to the ephemera piece because I knew it was going to be a little tricky to glue the mummy cloth because there's so many holes. It makes it a little tricky to use. So that's why I stapled it. I knew the staple would be covered, and I just start layering everything down. Now, as I lay this photo down, I remember I really wanted to add this gold medal stamp behind the picture. And so I quickly pushed that down behind it because this liquid glue works really well and dries very quickly. This is the Barely Arts Precision Glue. I've had a couple of you message me on what liquid glue I use. I was talking about it almost every video for a couple months, and so I decided to stop talking about it. I have no affiliate with it. It's just something that I do love. I have almost stopped entirely using my Scotch ATG gun and kind of more so transitioned into a liquid glue girl. So I really like how this tag is coming along, but it still doesn't feel complete to me. And so I grabbed my white China marker. Now this is a new product for me, and I can't wait to see other ways for me to use it. But for right now, I'm just using it to add a shadow or an edge around this tax document. This tax document seemed like it was kind of getting lost in the background. And so by adding that white edge around it, helps it really stand out against the tag. I also grabbed this new texture paste from Tim Holtz. This is in the color Grave. It's like a gray, kind of sandy color. Great for coloring graves. It comes in a 2-pack with the Crypt Grit Paste that I know you've seen me use if you watch any of my videos. I'm loving this 2-pack. I'm thinking I probably need to get another set just in case they never come out for good. I'm hoping Ranger comes out with them, but who knows. But what I was worried about was losing that speckled egg color in the background. I really wanted that texture, but I didn't want to lose the color. So instead of losing the color, I grab my embossing glaze from Tim Holtz that is in the speckled egg color, and I just sprinkle that over the texture paste. Now by pouncing on the texture paste with my fingers, it gives an amazing texture. I can only think of it as, I don't know, I can only think of it as like rusty. When metal gets rusty and kind of crackles a little bit, not crackles, but kind of gets spiky, you know? I don't know. I know of one thing that I can think of that is like that in my life. But yeah, so that's what it reminds me of. And so I'm just adding this embossing glaze on top. And then when I heat it, it'll kind of give this nice shine, but also kind of spiky, rusty texture. After I've melted that embossing glaze, this tag will be finished. But I did want to talk to you about the rest of Theology Thursdays. Now, today was a little shorter on the questions, but I know in the future we'll probably go more in depth on the questions about the questions, and just more in depth about the Westminster Catechism. Today, I just wanted to give you a broader overview kind of the Westminster Shorter Catechism in case you haven't ever heard of it before. And so that's why we kind of talked more about the overall catechism than the question itself. So stay tuned for next week. I can't wait to go over question 2 with you guys. If you want to get any of the books that I have, I will put links down below. Those are affiliate links to Christian Book, so definitely check those out. I hope you've enjoyed this first Theology Thursday, and we'll talk to y'all soon. Have a great day, guys. Bye.